Okay, guys, welcome back to Let's Get Freaky podcast. I'm super excited. I've got a very special guest on tonight. I've been following this dude on Instagram for a long time now. I said to him before we started recording, I feel like I know him already, and he's never met me before. So welcome to the show, JT. How are you, brother? Thank you for being here, man.
I'm doing excellent, man. How are you doing? Thank you for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure. As I said, I've been looking at you, I've been watching you, and that sounds a bit weird, on social media. You've got an awesome YouTube channel. JT follows JC. And your work is awesome, man. Like you put out these incredible reels on Instagram and you've got a massive following. So I'm very excited to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, man. Like I said, it's all from, glory of God that, I did never seek out to have a social media following or anything like that. It was just that, I'm probably like a lot of people who woke up, about 3 or 4 years ago and we said, man, I need to start talking about what's true and what's not true because, the traditional media is not doing it. So that's when started to become. I mean, like, I'm not one of these people who are like in the cult of Elon Musk, but I mean, it's basically. I do think he's right though when he's like on Twitter. It's like we're the media now,
Yeah.
and for better or for worse. But yeah, like I think that you just start speaking the truth, and people realize, hey, this guy doesn't have any reason to lie to me, or he seems more trustworthy than the people who get paid to promote government propaganda. So
Mhm. 100%,
yeah,
man.
and then before you know it, you're like, wow, people care what I think, and then I'm here. It's kind
Yeah.
of crazy.
Yeah, man. See, just for me, like the big wake up, like a lot of people, I think was 2020. I think that was a sort of real eye opener. I don't want to like. I'm not saying it. COVID was. I don't want to get into was it real, was it not? I think everyone's got their own opinion there, but the whole way it was handled, the way the media seemed to be controlling the narrative, and we could all see what was going on, and they were telling us something else was happening. It was very, very strange, man. And that was the sort of wake up for me. That's where my whole thinking changed. Was that similar for you?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, so I'm probably a little bit older than you, so I just turned 46, and so I was just a little bit older than 40 when all the stuff hit the fan, and I was just I might have already become a little bit cynical at like getting a little bit older, just saying like, I don't know that things are the way I thought it was going to be. And then but then you're trying to like establish like a family and a business, and you're doing all the things like you're what you've been taught is the right way to do it. And especially in America, we've always thought like, oh, we're like one of these world leaders, everything's so stable, everything's going to be the way it's been, and you can kind of count on that. But obviously, there's peaks and valleys, and you're like, I don't know if that's even true though. But 2020 established it like, no, no, it's things are way less stable than you ever realized. And then at that time, I was going on Twitter, and I wasn't actively trying to be a influencer or anything like that. But I was just like another person just reading the news on Twitter. Like we had the pandemic, and then we had the election that year for America, and it was just like
Wild.
I just remember thinking like there is no. I was watching things like progress in real time, and I was noticing like that people really didn't care what was true. And I was really getting disillusioned by that. And I think that's kind of what woke me up where I was like, man, I don't think that anyone even cares what's true. They're definitely not telling you the truth on the media, and I'm watching people get smeared and banned and labeled as a whatever in order to get them out of the public discourse.
Mhm.
And and through that time, I was going through a personal like a family crisis too. I got divorced during this time, and I was like, like a lot of people probably had marital troubles during the pandemic when the whole world stopped and everything just changed on a dime. So like I really did have to say, wow, nothing is true that I've been told. I can't count on any person anymore. Can't count on my government for sure, the media.
Mhm.
And then so like I kind of had to as luckily my parents did raise me as a Christian, and I really had to kind of say, so what can I count on? And so I leaned back on God, and I read the Bible again. I started to like say, okay, so hell or high water, this is true. I'm going to believe this. And if I believe in this, God has promised me something better than this. And so I started reading it again, and I started to really just think like, I can't worry about all these outside voices and the lies and things. I said, God has said, hey, just try to do what you're best for me, and then I'm going to take care of you. And I remember just feeling like one day I just thought, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. And he changed me like that. It was like I went from like
Wow.
anxious to just like through like the worst time of my life. I just thought, you know what? I finally had peace. And through that time, though, it's like obviously, so I started reading my Bible, and then I was going down the rabbit hole of like every conspiracy. Because so if they lied about this, what if they? We know this is not the first lie they've told us. So like, how far back does it go? And then she's like pulling the thread of the sweater of like how many lies have been told, and
Mhm.
then I mean now you get to like where I've been doing it for like 3, 4 years. Lots. Like I mean, it's like I don't haven't got to the end of the sweater yet, but it's
Yeah, man. But you go down one rabbit hole and then there's another 10. Like it's just
yeah.
never ending. I can't believe you've only been doing it for 3 or 4 years though, to be honest. Like, because your knowledge is amazing, and the information that you've got on the different topics. That's wild that you've been doing this for 4 years.
Well,
I,
I've been publicly doing it, and I guess what I would say is that I feel like that looking back, like God has prepared me for a lot of what I've been doing, like without knowing it. Like so, like I grew up in a Christian home, and I knew a lot of Bible stuff before I ever really like was a doing Bible studies personally. So it's kind of like almost like I felt like that it was like God just gave me the key, and He started to unlock things that I already kind of had learned. And I don't know, it's just the way I am. I've always been a little bit of like a curious, skeptical person of like, no, that doesn't make sense. And so like I have a lot of I've watched a million movies. I read all the comic books. I did all the, I lived a kind of normal life. But so like when I consumed culture, I was always looking at things with a critical eye, and I liked reading reviews about movies I did not like. Like I was always like that. Everyone liked the movie. Oh, that movie sucked. Like, and here's why. And I would like to. That's how kind of how my brain has always
Mhm.
been wired. So when I started to wake up, I'm like, wait a minute, that one movie was had this certain message in it. And then it was kind of like that once I started to see the code, it's kind of like, we always use this analogy in the truther community is the Matrix. It's
Mhm.
like I felt like once I could see the code, it was like, oh my gosh, I can see it. I can see it everywhere. And then my memory would go back, and I'd be like, oh, I remember it here.
Yeah.
And that I think so. So yeah, like it's almost like that, you know, yeah, God had prepared me for doing this before I was ever really woke to any of it.
Do you find it hard watching movies now? Because you're seeing every detail and every sign and symbol. Is it hard just watching a movie now? Are you just picking up
Well,
on?
I would say that as somebody who knows like what they're trying to do to us through subliminal messages and subconscious things in the culture, I would feel bad if I tried to pretend like that wasn't there.
Hmm.
So I feel like that I can still appreciate a good story, and like that obviously I'm not numb to like that, hey, that was good. I mean, like I'm not going to say that was crap because it was devilry or whatever, but I would say that here's what they were trying to say. I
Hmm.
mean, the main reason I can't watch movies anymore is because most of them are not good,
Yeah.
but like going back and watching old movies, the subtlety in how they put messages in them, and they tell a good story in a way that a lot of times they are biblical stories, and sometimes they're inverted, but like there's classic stories that are just resonate with us. I think because they do come from a true place. But yeah, like sometimes I would say that I have been able to enjoy bad movies because I do enjoy seeing what are they trying to say with this. So I'm like,
Interesting.
so I would say I'm consuming them in a slightly different way than, well, a very different way than I used to.
Yeah.
But I guess I've always been like that. Yeah, I don't know. I've always been critical of movies, and like that I can take them for what they are, but I can I can be more interested in a movie that's not good because I know that there's a layer under that the general public is not getting.
Yeah, yeah. It's just get hitting that subconscious for them. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
man. I watched and I've forgotten the name of the film, the Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman film, the famous
Oh, is
90s.
it Eyes Wide Shut?
Yes, I watched, and I've seen that film before, but I watched it again recently with all this new
Mm-hmm.
conspiracy knowledge that I have, and it was just like, man, this film's amazing. Like, it was a good film already, but now you know that it's like pretty much a true story.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. Like, especially that movie. I remember I watched that again a couple of years ago, and I remember thinking like, I wonder what new I'm gonna see. And I didn't really feel like I saw anything new, but it was more like, wow, this is kind of blatant. And I guess when they put that out there, and obviously everyone, all the buzzwords about Illuminati and all this kind of stuff, and they're like, oh, that's just a conspiracy. That was a club that was a long time ago, and don't worry, it's completely defunct now. And then you see this movie, and you're like, whatever you call the Illuminati, whatever you call these secret clubs, that most certainly is what it is. And yeah, like it's not crazy to think that elite people get together and do depraved things because obviously now we know about the secret islands and all the weird stuff, and it's like
Hmm.
the list that people are on, the Diddy parties and all that stuff. It's like, yeah, what do you think that is? Like, okay, so it's more theatrical when you see the mask, but like there's pictures from like the Rothschilds parties where they're wearing like the same mask, and obviously we know that if you have done any research into the places we're talking about, we know that those are the elites of the elites, and those are the people who would throw the parties that, yeah, you couldn't disclose what happened at those parties unless you were you weren't afraid to get unalived, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. It is wild, man. And obviously now, as recording this episode, we've just had Jay-Z has been arrested. Jay-Z,
I know. I
Jay-Z.
think said JT got arrested. I was like,
Oh,
oh
not
wait,
JT, not yet. No, no, not yet. We
wait.
don't want that. We don't want that.
No, no, no.
And obviously P. Diddy, and you're getting people saying, oh, people, we've been talking about these guys for years. Like these names have been there for years.
Mm.
And now like the mainstream's getting it and people are talking about it. And I said to my friend the other day, you wait till you hear about Tom Hanks. And I really hope that's not true about Tom Hanks because,
Oh,
you know,
no, I mean that's the whole thing. Where like, what's funny is that I'll tell you a little story. It's like, so when I first got on TikTok and I was making videos, so I was doing Christian content stuff and I was doing conspiracy, and that's wide range of things I went through. And I joked because I really felt like that I'd made it as a conspiracy theorist when I became a conspiracy. That like somebody was saying like that I was Isaac Cappy, and I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was like,
wow.
yeah, he was like some celebrity who was disclosing all kinds of things about these elite, whatever, satanic pizza files. And so he ended up dead. And then somebody said, he got suicided,
Yeah.
and he was talking about Tom Hanks and all these other people. Of course, like
Yeah.
I'm not him, but maybe I have a
Are you
similar
sure?
mannerisms and stuff. Yeah,
Was
I'm
that
pretty sure. I'm
when
pretty
they
sure,
do?
but it was funny that somebody said this is him in some kind of way, like he's changed his identity, and I was like,
That's
but yeah, but the funny
wild.
thing was like people were talking about Tom Hanks and stuff, and it's like, yeah, so what he moved to Greece during the certain time during COVID and got
Hmm.
dual citizenship, and he's hanging out with David Geffen and Oprah on these yachts, and yeah, all that stuff is connected. All these people who are connected, the Diddy's, the Jay-Z's, and yeah, I mean, when you do go down the rabbit hole, and you don't have to go far down to see this part. I think the normies are starting to wake up to this. Is that yeah, when you go down the rabbit hole just a little bit, that all your favorite celebrities, all of them,
Hmm.
all of them do sick, depraved stuff, and they show the signs all the time. They're covering up one eye, they're showing like their
Hmm.
hands in their things, they're doing like this, they're doing like this.
Hmm.
They do this stuff on magazine covers, and then they end up in weird pictures and weird parties, and they're all on the same list. They're all connected together. It's all of them. So
Yeah.
like, so the real question is why? And I think that was another thing that probably woke me up, pandemic, election, but it was like the whole Epstein type stuff. I was just like, To me, I thought, you know what, it's got to be more than these people just being perverts. It has to be more than that. There's just if it was one or two of them, fine. When you see the list,
Hmm.
you're like, it's
It's,
something, there's something more than this.
hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's something that allows them to get access. They're not just doing it just because otherwise, why would they all be doing it together? Because be they could be on a list. They could all
Hmm.
be on the same island where they could be all kind of like guilty by association. So if like you were going to do these things and then you see these people's Twitter feeds for years and they're making sick jokes about things like why would they be talking about it at all?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right? So like
Yeah,
I would
man.
say that it's very strong evidence that there is a connected elite group that do depraved stuff, and that's why they're in the elite group.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think that's the only way you can really make it big in Hollywood is by being in that circle?
I would say, without a shadow of doubt, yes. I would say that there's some level of compromise because I think that like when you see like these all these pop stars saying they sold their souls, and I think that the normies would say, oh well, that's a hyperbole. They're trying to exaggerate to say they signed a deal that wasn't good.
Hmm.
But it's kind of like you see the best of the best, or like the most elite people who got what the world would consider as like they've got everything. But then they seem all like really melancholy and like not happy about everything the way things are going, and they seem a little bitter, and
Hmm.
there's something a little bit off about it. And then you have shows like what America's Got Talent, American Idol, and it's like the industry is showing you they could replace you at any time with just random people off the street if they
Yeah.
wanted to push these people. So it's kind of like how does a Taylor Swift go from some little country girl playing her
Yeah.
little acoustic guitar to what she is now on an Eras
Hmm.
tour and on TV all the time and on every magazine cover.
Yeah.
I think it's because she was willing to do what it took to do that. And then you have people in Hollywood. It's like, yeah, it's like the whole thing where like, they talk about certain people always putting on, men wearing dresses and makeup and like, it's like
Yeah.
all of them. I mean, what was it very recently? It was like Brad Pitt was on some kind of weird magazine cover wearing a dress and
Yes.
you're thinking
Yeah.
like, and you would think that he's at the stage of his life and the achievement he's achieved, the fame and the money he's got, he would say, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
I'm Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
He's like, do you know who I am? I'm Brad Pitt. But yet he's still like, why is he doing that?
Because
Unless,
they must know the conspiracy as well.
well, I would say that I mean, obviously it's like it's sort of weird. I've always wondered too, like that when you get to like old politicians in America and old people in Hollywood, wouldn't you say at some point you'd say, this is enough, right? Like I've already done it all. Like maybe I'm just gonna retire with my money, enjoy the rest of my life, and I don't want everyone
Hmm.
forcing me into these positions. But it does feel like a deal with the devil where they have to continue. There's no end.
Yeah.
Like when they're called upon to do their thing, they're going to go do it because
They
they
sign that
made
contract.
they made a deal a long time ago,
Yeah,
and
man.
they got what they wanted, but it was probably not exactly like they thought it would
Hmm.
be.
Yeah. It is wild. Because I mean, even if it wasn't, they what do they call it when they wear the dress? They call it something. It's called like the humiliation. Is it ritual?
Yeah,
Humiliate.
humiliation ritual. Yes, the lots of them do that.
Yeah. So they must know that. Like that must be something that's talked about. So like, if you're a big celebrity and they say you're going to wear a dress, you would say no, I'm not. I'm not because it's then they'll think that I'm in this humiliation ritual. They must know.
Well,
So.
you would think at this point that it's so, like people like Cat Williams, who's an
Mhm.
American comedian.
Yeah.
He went on Shannon Sharp's show, famously Club Shay Shay, and he was talking about all these certain kind of like black comedians who've had to put on the dress, and he's like, I'm
Mhm.
not doing that, and you know that I haven't done that. I have not compromised myself in that way. And I'm one of those people who thinking like, I don't know that you haven't compromised yourself. I know you haven't done that, but he's specifically pointing to these people, and it's like, so the people who put the dress on have got the jobs. You
Hmm.
know, they've got the big roles, and it's like the big Disney movies, you know, like that family movies, and then they're on, you
John
know, the
Cena.
big, yeah, yeah, exactly. He just did something recently where he comes out like wearing his underwear or something, or
Yeah.
just like, and you're
Yeah.
just like, yeah, you would at some point you want to see more men that would have integrity to say, no, I'm not willing to do anything for money,
Yeah.
right? Like, you know, because like I think a lot of us, and especially like people, I mean, you can believe me or you don't believe me, but like my platform has grown, but I know the ways I could make it bigger if I was willing to say certain things that I know, you know, I could compromise my integrity. I could say things that they were maybe half truths in order to get, like, I could be like a Billy Carson who could say things that people want to believe, and then
Hmm.
you could elevate it. Of course, you see what happens. That eventually those people get exposed, but yeah, obviously the world is really looking for people who are not willing to just sell themselves out just to get all
Hmm.
the things. And it's like, yeah, I mean, how much is it worth to you to be able to rest your head on the pillow at night and then sleep good? I mean, because it's like,
Hmm.
I guess, I guess that's part of what woke me up was that I've never been rich. I mean, I've never really been poor either, but like I've done well, and I got a lot of things that I thought I wanted. And I remember thinking like, this is a little empty. So like maybe that's one thing that God taught me early on is like that I knew being rich was not really my goal, you know, because like there's, you know, it's like it's the achievement is kind of like what people chase, and then the money comes afterwards. But like there's no satisfaction in just the money. So
Yeah.
like you could imagine if you had as much money as those people, like at some point you would have to say like this is not worth it. Like, you know,
Hmm.
you have enough, but and yet they still do. Like I said, I think Brad Pitt's one of the best examples because it's like, how much money do you think he's got?
Oh man, it must be near the billions.
Yeah, I would say
I
so.
don't.
And he could go to any party, he could do anything, or maybe he couldn't go to every party unless he did this.
Yeah.
He could not be connected with a certain social circle unless he continued
Hmm.
to do what they wanted him to do. And yeah, but eventually, like, yeah, you know, the chickens come home to roost, and it's like people like Harvey Weinstein, P. Diddy, Jay-Z.
Hmm.
Eventually, like they get exposed, and people are saying like, and then later all these stories come out saying like it was like the worst kept secret of all time. Like
Yeah.
everybody knew.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I'm sure you know of Jimmy Savile in the
Yeah.
UK. I
Yeah.
mean, that story. I mean, every time you see that man, it makes you feel
He's a
sick.
knight. Wasn't he
Oh,
knighted?
he was right in there with the Royals. Yeah, yeah, man. I mean, apparently, like he had a lot of respect in the BBC. Like he was the main man. Like I remember I'm sure it was my granddad. I remember him saying to me when I was a kid, like he described him as like a gangster. He's a gangster. He's a dangerous man. I remember my granddad saying that. But obviously, nothing ever came out about what he did until he passed. And to me, that is just absolutely wild. Like I feel like I'd like to think if I worked with someone like that, I wouldn't just stay quiet. I mean, I can imagine the things that would happen to you if you did speak out. But I feel like
Hmm.
I would want to speak out, and whatever happens, happens. But I know that's easy said because I'm sure he was a very dangerous man. But the fact that there's people like that and with that power, it's wild, man. It really is wild.
Yeah, it's kind of
Scary.
like you ever watched like kind of like British or like the mafia movies in America, like
Hmm.
where everybody knows who the mobsters are, right? We know who they are, but they do not get caught until they do.
Hmm.
Right. So like
Yeah.
nobody's surprised when one of the mobsters gets arrested at some point. They're kind of it's almost like we're surprised that it took so long to be able to build this case against them. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what these celebrities are. And I think the interesting part about it is like the more you look into secret societies, like the mafia is just one of the many secret societies. They're all the kind of the same thing. So they might be the most kind of like I don't know, they made it a little bit sexy in the movies where you got these guys, these Italians from from Sicily, and their hair's all slicked back, and they've got this certain style. They're wearing the wingtip shoes and the nice suits, and so they project this kind of certain kind of gangster attitude. But these guys, yeah, like you're saying, like the Jimmy Savile's a gangster.
Hmm.
He's not like he doesn't look like Tony Soprano from that show, The Sopranos, but he's the same kind of like that. I'm above the law. The everybody else is a sucker because they're playing by the rules, and we're above the rules.
Hmm.
And it does seem like that those guys can do that until they get out of line. And that's the question I've always wondered. It's like that the Harvey Weinsteins in Hollywood, the P. Diddy's in the music industry. It's like everyone knows what they were doing. Like even like people like me know. So what did they finally do where they were
Yes.
actually pushed out and exposed and they had to be the scapegoat for all the
Yeah.
bad things?
Yeah, that is what I was going to ask you. Why now? Like, why? What have they done now? That is, yeah, man. It'd be interesting to know. And who's coming next? As we say,
Well,
there's.
right. Like, yeah, who's the person who makes the call on like the no, they've got to go down
Mhm.
now.
Yeah.
And I mean, so I mean, obviously, I think that just the way I've always thought about it is like that maybe that they were getting a little too big for their britches.
Hmm.
Like they were trying to think that they're too big to be controlled, and then they had to be humbled. And maybe that's a message to the other people who are like not
Yeah.
playing ball like they should. It's like, no, you guys, you're not. Nobody's too big.
Hmm.
Like they will go down too, and then we'll raise another person up in their position, and then that'll be a message to everybody else that you could be next.
Yeah, man. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with this stuff, like with the P Diddy and the Jay Z, because there's obviously going to be a lot of other names coming out in the conspiracy world. These names have been floating, as we said, for years. Like we've heard these names for
Hmm.
years, and people have been saying for
Hmm.
years that it's coming. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, man.
For sure.
So, so before 2020, before the 4 years that you've just had, where you've had this, you know, what would you call it? Would you awakening or?
Yeah, awakening is a good way to say it. Yeah, for sure.
Did you have any a conspiracy mind growing up? Have you always been sort of, because I would say I've always had sort of a conspiracy mind where I'm interested in it and but it wasn't until 2020 that I was like, yeah, oh my gosh, this what they tell you you're crazy for believing is real.
Well, I would say that just based on being a kind of raised as a biblical Christian, I definitely was like, well, they're telling us we evolved from monkeys and then we came from Big Bang. So it was like instantly, it was already told like, here's what the science says. As Christians, we know that's not true because the Bible says this. And so I was raised like that. So I guess maybe I already had a default of like, just because science says something does not mean it's true. And so I guess I was always just kind of skeptical in that way. And I guess I've always been just like, why? Are you sure? Like, how do you know that? Like, I've always been kind of that way.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, like the first really conspiracy I really enjoyed was that show Ancient Aliens. Is
Yes.
because I started watching that show, and like I said, as a guy who always believed the Bible was true, I didn't believe in aliens. My parents never believed in aliens, so I grew up in that generation where it's like if you believed in aliens, you're weird and that kind of thing. If you saw a UFO, you'd be like, give that guy the side eye, like you so what? Yeah, sure, buddy. So watching that show, it was not about the alien part. It was more about like the megalithic monuments and stones and just different structures around the world that just are really unexplainable. And I guess I was bored in history class in like in school, but I had never heard about anything like that. I never heard about all this stuff. And I guess I grew up like in like the Indiana Jones movies and things like that, adventure movies. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Like, so how did they build that stuff?
Hmm.
And I think that so without knowing like that I was being a conspiracy theorist, but I just knew that if science said or archaeologists, science, whatever, they said that slaves built these pyramids. they cut them with copper tools and they did all this stuff. And I was like, when they, obviously when they lay out the case of like why that's not probable is because how big they are, how much resources it would have took, and how like even in today's standards, this would be ridiculously hard, if not impossible,
Hmm.
for us to do it. It's impossible in the way that we don't do it. Like
Yeah.
so I don't could we do it if we put every bit of resources behind making a pyramid? Could we do it? Yeah, I think we could, but it's kind of like it's not possible to get the men and all the resources and all the logistics to do it. So whether I mean, I imagine all humanity, if we ever got behind something, we could do a lot of things. But
Hmm.
the point is, like, we're told they did that when they went from like hunter gatherers to then the next thing they decided to do was build the craziest things you've ever seen in your whole life.
Yeah. Perfect
Things
measurements.
things you've never seen done today. It does not make sense. So with that mindset, I really started to question everything because I thought that history was written down. I thought that we knew what happened in the past. And then so when you find out these grand mysteries, well, then you realize, wait a minute, if they don't know how they did it, well, what else don't they know? What
Hmm.
else are they saying they know but don't know? Because like I said, they'll say they know how they built the pyramids, but we know that they don't when you listen to how dumb their answers are.
Hmm.
So then you
100%.
go you go back deeper and you're like, man, we really don't know a lot about the place we live in. And then again, you get into like eventually once I start making content, I'm like, there's no way we went to the moon. Like I was even just
Hmm.
making I made a video the other day about the Artemis mission for NASA. They delayed the moon mission another couple years. So now they're going to go to the moon at the earliest in 2027. So I said it was funny in the video was that so the Apollo mission, which supposedly got us to the moon, it started in 1961, and then by 1969 they had people walking on the moon. Well, the Artemis mission started in 2017, so now they're saying they need 2027 by the earliest. So that would be over 10 years to potentially get something. And that's at the earliest.
Hmm.
So in the 1960s, they could do it in 8 years. But in this day, the
Doesn't
best they
make
could do is
sense.
10. Yeah. So now you're I said the obvious conclusion is they're not going because they can't go. And if they can't go now, they never could go.
Yeah.
And so like those kind of big things. So you're talking about they're lying about the past, they're lying about today. What else are they lying about?
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Everything.
And that's probably why they won't tell us now. Because the moon landing, I mean, I know it causes a lot of controversy, but I'm with you, man. I can't see us that we went to the moon. I really can't. And but if they told us now, if they did come out now and say, yeah, we kind of made that up because we wanted to beat Russia and look good, and we the world would just go insane because, as you say, like we know, but if every man knows, every man and woman knows that that was a lie, then everything's a lie. What else have they lied about? And the world would just go crazy, crazier than it already is.
Well, I mean, I think it would for a bit, but maybe it would straighten itself out. I just think that
Hmm.
like that I think that if they came out and said they didn't go now, there would still be people who believe they did go.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there would still be somebody saying, "Oh, they're saying this because like they're still trying to keep the worldview they had." And I think
Mhm.
there's so much cognitive dissonance about that stuff. It's like this in the same way that like I think one of the things that really tripped me out over the past couple of years was that after 2020 and the pandemic stuff, that public officials, I mean specifically here, I'm not sure exactly what they said in the UK, but they came out and said, "Oh, well, yeah, we did kind of exaggerate certain things in order to get people to do things." And you're like, "So you lied.
Yeah.
We knew you lied. We said you lied." And then people in America obviously they got banned off social media, they got smeared. And then later, these people literally, I think it's like Deborah Burks in America, wrote a book where she was straight up saying she was lying about things And you're like, wow, like the gall of people to do that. And they say, because it's like, well, you're too stupid to weigh the facts and make the right decision. So I'm going to lie on the other side of things to err on the side of caution. It's like, but you're saying it's a caution in one way because you want me to do certain things. But like obviously there's danger in the other way if I listen to you.
Hmm.
Like financially, obviously, if you don't go to work that day because you're scared of something they say could kill you. Well, obviously there's a danger in that too, right? That you err too far on the other side.
Hmm.
But I mean, so like if they did that, and they did, so like I said, we're not going to, without all the details, they did that and they admitted that. So now what if they said, yeah, like you said, well, we said we went to the moon because we were in the Cold War and we're trying to beat the Russians, which were the communists. So like, we did you guys all a favor by saying that. And then you could say, all right, well, I get it, but at the same time, like I don't trust you anymore, though.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
like so
man.
you can't have it both ways because you did lie to us.
Hmm.
And even if you had a good reason, I mean, like yeah, yeah, that's just like that's the way it is. So now you've lost all the public trust, especially when you're like you're supposed to be a scientist, like so
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's not going to work for me, right?
yeah, man. It was a wild time. I mean, and I don't think I'd like to think that that could never happen again. But then you talk to people even now, and you're like, yeah, this could happen again, because there are people out there that will go down that route again. It's
Well, yeah, well, I've struggled with that over the past year, where as I was making videos and I was saying like that, I'm sure you deal with this in your personal life and people you even know online, where you're like that somebody who thinks they're awake because they're spot on with the one conspiracy you're talking about, and the government's saying this, and they know that's a lie, and they agree with you, and then the news starts to talk about something that's different, and then they are right on the side of the news, and they go right back to believing all the things that they have to trust the news to believe, and you're like you you're not awake. Like, you're
yeah,
you're not awake. And I'm not saying like that everything, I'm not saying 100% of the news is not real. But I'm saying like that the narratives they're pushing are obviously meant to push to people to one direction. So yeah, like so you're obviously correct that when the next big thing happens, like the people who say, "Oh, I will never get fooled. I'll never submit to that again. I'll never do this." You're like, "We know, I mean, yeah, I mean, not to be cynical, like we know that the vast majority of people will be ready for the next thing,
yeah,
and
yeah.
they're not going to push the next thing until people are going to be compliant for the large part.
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, I'm no expert in anything, but I, I don't know how you can't see. Now, looking back over the last 4 years, I don't know how you can't see that we were lied to, that were manipulated, and that they've even changed the narrative from now to like a year ago in front of us. And I just can't believe that you wouldn't be able to see that. And there are people that, and I think some people, and I get this, all they're worried about is their family and living in their bubble, their work, and just having a comfortable life. And I 100% get that. Nobody wants to be looking over their shoulder all the time and
Hmm.
paranoid about conspiracies. But I don't know, man. I can't just ignore it. I
No,
can't
well,
just pretend that didn't happen.
I think that when I woke up, and I think praise God for this, was that I realized that like that there's as a Christian, I would say that there's worse things than death, right? Like we would say, like if we believe in something better than this, we realize that it's like saving this is not at all costs. Like, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like that, we want to be able to have integrity. We want to be able to stand before God one day. If you believe in that, then so this in the same way, even if you don't, it's like that, would you save your life in order to be a slave? You know what I mean? Like to be in prison, it's kind of like, would you be willing to fight for the freedom you have?
Hmm.
That kind of way.
Yeah.
Cause it's kind of like if an opposing force came, like a foreign horde came into your land to fight against you, would you submit? So
Hmm.
I think that people have to ask themselves that question. So obviously, this is more of like the analogy of like slowly cooking the frog, right? Like that they're turning up the heat gradually. They're not going to turn it all the way up because you'll jump out of the pot, but maybe they could lull you into sleep where you would submit.
Hmm.
But yeah, like I do think that people don't. Yeah, when it gets put in those kind of terms of like, well, this could kill you, and it's like, yeah, well, yeah, I could die, but like, yeah, but I do have more integrity than that, that I would say that I'm willing to put it in God's hands and not yours.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think that ultimately I do think that that's about faith in what you believe in. So it's kind of like
Hmm.
you do kind of people do kind of show you what they believe when push comes to shove. So
Yeah, man.
yeah, and obviously a lot of people have I do think that praise God that I do think that people I've got well, many people have got a second chance. So if like something happens next, it's like, so God has said, like, some people have made decisions medically that they would not do again. And it's like, so what happens when the next time, if you got a do-over, what decision will you make?
Hmm. I think it'd be a lot different next time. I would hope so
I
anyway.
hope so. I do hope so. I mean, I feel like that if anything, we are trying to, I think that if anything, what I try to do is other than just directly point people towards Jesus is just to get people to think for themselves and question things.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's funny that I make videos about like history and just saying I don't believe it. And there's certain parts of history and science I don't believe anymore. And people would say, "Oh, you're stupid. This guy is dumb. Not it. This guy should not have a podcast. He's an idiot." And I'm like, like this is not to brag. I've got a college degree, so like I've
Hmm.
graduated from school. Like I've got the right answers on the test, but I just don't believe all those answers anymore. And so I do point back to this past couple of years and it's like, oh, so I'm stupid. And I ask them about like, what kind of decision did you make the past 3 years? Did you trust them? Okay, so if you did or you didn't, do you regret it or do you still trust them? And now I'm stupid. So I'm saying like if you if you don't believe them now, like how could you? I mean, if you don't believe the news today, how could you believe the news from 100 years ago?
100%,
From
man. Yeah.
200 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Like
Yeah.
you would have to be very naive to think that the fake news just started recently.
Yeah. 100%. And it was obviously a lot easier 100 years ago to change the news and the narrative completely.
Yeah,
Like,
you get past one generation of people because even like I'm sure like in the UK the same thing like with the whole Brexit the things with the Brexit you have like
hmm.
January 6th here and it's like very recent things and like you could imagine what somebody would write about those stories in
Hmm.
40 years from now. And then
Yes.
if you weren't there to tell people, no, that was not how it happened.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
they will write it into this history books and it'll be just like this. And then somebody questions, I don't think it was like that. They're like, oh yeah, that one person wrote a book about that, but those people were like they were racist, they were this, they were a
Yeah.
science denier,
Yeah.
they were all the things that you don't want to be. So yeah, you can't believe that. Believe what's in your school textbook. That's the truth. And you're
Hmm.
like, so yeah, think about hundreds of years of that. Now am I crazy to distrust them? I'm not saying I know what's true about what happened thousands of years ago, but I'm saying is like I it does not make sense to me, and I haven't heard good answers about why I'm wrong.
Hmm. Yeah. 100%, man. There's a lot of evidence to point that our history is completely different. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I've got literally half an hour down the road. I've got Stonehenge right near me, and the mystery that's there, man, is unreal. And they literally just found another stone that I believe was from Scotland. I'm pretty sure that they've worked out that it's come from Scotland, and that completely changes the narrative. So, and they don't know. They literally don't know what it is, how it's got there, and yeah, man. That's another thing that I wanted to talk to you tonight about. Is I think I saw it on Instagram. You was talking about cities like Chicago and places like that that have got. There's a massive city there now and a massive
Mm-hmm.
population.
Right.
And I'm sure you were saying that the timeline that we've got, which is only really a short space, that America's really been there as it is now, doesn't seem to add up.
No, yeah, exactly. So I think that's one of the I had all these people coming at me saying, "Oh, this guy's an idiot. You obviously have no idea about construction." I was like, I hate to break it to you guys, but I own a commercial construction company. So I do have a little. I don't want to go too far into detail with that
Oh,
because I don't
mic
want people.
drop.
I don't want people. What's funny is like in certain spaces, I don't really want people to try to research that, and it's not because it's not true. It's because I don't want people messing with my day job.
Yeah.
But yes, I do have a pretty good idea of how long it takes to build a building and the kind of things we could do and we don't do, and like yeah, just the logistics of everything. Yeah, the timeline of America does not make sense.
Hmm.
So I would just say that, like, based on the story we've been told, so we have like the eastern seaboard of America is kind of like where you have the 13 colonies, and that's where all the people were for, the very, I guess maybe like the first 100 or so years of colonization in America, they just lived on the east coast of America. And then so that was where the British had their colony. And then the French owned kind of like the middle part of the country. And I think maybe the Spanish owned part of the western part. Well, so we're told about that. Yeah, so the French owned like kind of like the Chicago area all the way through like almost to the West Coast. And the Spanish owned like just a little bit, and Mexico owned like the western part of America. So during, I guess, was it the French Revolution, Napoleon needed more money. So he sold part of America to Thomas Jefferson and the US government. And that's called the Louisiana Purchase. And so that was done in the early 1800s. And then eventually they said Thomas Jefferson sent these two guys named Lewis and Clark to go explore the new territory they just bought. Okay, so this is like 1803. 1803 to 1806, Lewis and Clark voyage on the Missouri River west of the Mississippi. Now, Chicago's a little bit east of the Mississippi, but it was still a French territory. And at this time, nobody lives there. Like, nobody lives in any of this. Like, we're told none of these cities exist at this time. And then, so by 1840, Chicago's got like 4,500 people. And by like 1850 or 1860, it's like the first pictures of it, it's a full grown city. It's a city like you would see. I really can't understand the logistics of how you could centrally plan a city like that
Hmm.
and it would just pop up out of nowhere. Because you're thinking like you would have construction happening 24/7 and it have to be perfectly laid out. I mean, we're told that America is this just this melting pot of migrants coming in. Are they all construction workers? Like, do they all know how to build? Are they all stonemasons? Like, how do they know how to build everything? Because it's like, it's in the same way that somebody would say the Great Pyramids were built by slaves, or they were okay. So these slaves must have been really good builders too, right? So they were not just normal slaves; they were actually really good at constructing things, and they were real exact about the way they built things. So when you see these places, and then there's another example is like San Francisco. So again, San Francisco is on the far end. We're told it was not even discovered until 1776, which is the same year America was founded. It's also the same year the Illuminati was founded. Kind of
Oh,
kind of
interesting.
coincidental. And then so we're told that like the west coast of America was not really established, or at least migration didn't happen to there until they found gold, supposedly. But like places like San Francisco are not close to the gold. I think it's like 40, 50 miles from like wherever supposedly the gold was found.
Hmm.
And then you would see San Francisco at the earliest pictures. I think in 1849 there was supposedly like 1,000 people or less in San Francisco. By 1873, there's this famous panoramic shot of San Francisco, and it's like a full grown city. It's just like it just sprawling around everything. There's not one building being built, and all the stuff looks like it has age to it too. And it's not just there's not just wood structures. It's like brick buildings, stone buildings, cathedrals, and all the things. It looks like an old established city. So
Hmm.
somebody like me says that does not make sense. It does not make sense that the transcontinental railroad had not been created yet. Like, so obviously the railroad tracks had not been laid all the way across America yet. So you think there's no roads, there's no railroads, there's how are they getting all the materials to the city?
Hmm.
And then who's building it all? And how are they feeding themselves while they're building it all? Who's paying for all this stuff? Like, all those kind of questions. It's like that. I think that most people just accepted this story as it's true. And then if I question it, that's like blasphemy. It's like, no, but it does not make sense. And it's like San Francisco and Chicago are obviously kind of the two biggest examples of like how it doesn't make sense. But at the same time, they're telling us all these other cities were being built at the same time. Almost all these cities have different stories, like Seattle, Portland, like Sacramento. All these cities at the same time are also being built, even in the Midwest. And during that same period, we're told that there was a civil war in America. Which again, so think about the westward expansion wall. Could they expand westward when they're being drafted into a war against their brothers, against their fellow statesmen?
Hmm.
And then during that same time, that there's fires in all these
Yes.
cities.
Yeah, that's what I
They're
was going to
burn
say
they're
to you.
they're burning down.
Every
San
city had a
Francisco
great fire. Every city has had a great
San
fire.
Francisco, I think between 1850 and I think like 1910 or 1911, it had six great fires and
Wow.
it had two major earthquakes.
Wow, man.
Yeah, Chicago burned down twice,
Yeah.
maybe at least twice. But yeah, you pick I don't care which city it is. Go if anybody wants to do a web search on this, find a major American city and type in Great Fire
Hmm.
followed by that city, and there will
Yeah.
be one.
Yeah. Happened in London as well. Great fire in
Yeah,
London.
yeah.
Yeah, man.
All the cities have. So it's kind of like that. These people were, let's just say, they were very resilient at the very least, and it's like you're talking about a very primitive time. So like
Hmm.
I would say in my lifetime, I have not seen a city go from zero to a major city
No.
ever. I mean, I've seen smaller cities grow to be kind of big cities, but I've never seen a city go from nothing to like a
Yeah.
million people.
Yeah. Yeah.
None of us have seen that, I don't think.
No. No, man. And they done it so quick. And some amazing buildings as well. Like some, you know?
Well, right. Well, it's funny like the when we talk about kind of old world structures, we talk about this Greco-Roman style that's everywhere and it does not make sense. I mean, it really doesn't make sense in the way that we build things now, like that you see columns that are like 6 foot in diameter and then they're like 30 feet tall. And then you see the doors are like 18 feet tall, 20 feet tall, and you're like,
Mhm.
wow, that seems like a little bit overbuilt, to say the least. It's like that seems like a time where things must have been really good, right? Like you would have to build to that level. It's kind of like what we're taught about ancient Rome. Ancient Rome dominated the whole world. They brought back plunder and gold to their cities, and then they built monuments to all the things they did. But in America, that really doesn't make any sense because we're told that they liberated themselves from the British and then they were expanding westward. And meanwhile, they're fighting in all these wars. So it's like, so where did all the money come from to
Mhm.
do that?
Yeah.
And they built these Greco-Roman buildings in every major city, amazing structures that we don't do today. And then even that, like the cathedrals. So there's all these churches that are just like really ornate. And it's funny, like in a town near where I'm at, like it would not be considered one of the major cities in America. But it's old. I'm on the east coast of America, so it's an older city. It's called Norfolk, Virginia. And I'm looking at all these churches built in the 1890s, and they're really close together. And you're like, that's kind of weird. Like that, did the population really support the idea that they were going to have this church right next to this church, and they're very similar, and they're real, this stone immaculate buildings that we don't do today? And like, why not?
Mm.
Like there's something weird about that because it's kind of like that. There's probably way more denominations now than there used to be back in the early colonization period of America. But yet there's major awesome cathedrals on literally like every street corner
Hmm.
in these big cities. I don't know. I just find
Yeah,
that odd.
man,
I
it's
feel like
wild.
I feel like it's an excess that does not make it. Like I said, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how they did it. I don't know why they did it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's wild, man. So what do you think? Why do you think? Do you think there was a race there before? Like, obviously, we're told that the Native Americans were there, and then we came over, we took the land, and that's in a nutshell what we're told. But what do you think possibly really happened or really was going? I know it's difficult.
I feel like I've got a better grasp on this recently. My buddy Paul from Understanding Conspiracy. I think
Hmm.
have you had him on the
Yeah, yeah,
podcast?
he's been on the show. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
awesome, man.
so me and him became good friends, and we do a lot of podcasts together. But so we've been looking at this thing called the little season in the
Hmm.
Bible, where it's like in Revelation chapter 20, it mentions after Jesus returns, there's this time period where he locks Jesus and obviously God locks Satan in the bottomless pit, and he's locked in the pit for 1,000 years. And then there's something we call the millennial reign happens. And then so after the millennial reign happens, Satan's allowed to come back out again. Well, without going too much into the scriptures, I believe based on the way the Bible's written to who it was written to, when Jesus is on the earth, he's speaking to people like his return is imminent. Like he's going to come back in that generation. He says in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13 that before this generation passes away, all these things will take place. So he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and his return. So, with that being said, at the time of Jesus was obviously like kind of prime time Roman Empire times. And so what was really interesting, we have all often concluded like so we're going to take Jesus at his word. We don't know all the facts about like how it happened. We don't have all the we could never prove it to everybody because again, like we're already saying we distrust history. But what was really interesting, something happened where somebody sent us a video from this researcher named Gunnar Heinsohn, and we had questioned timeline. A lot of people have questioned like could we reasonably say for sure that it is the year 2024? I don't know that. I mean, like I said, a lot of people have said that, hey, maybe some of the dates could have been altered. Maybe there's been 1,000 years added. Some people have speculated there's 1,000 years taken away. But what was super interesting is that this guy Gunnar Heinsohn, he was a economist, he was a sociologist, he was a professor, researcher. But what he did research into was chronology. And his conclusion was that in the first millennia AD, from like year 1 to 1,000, 700 years was added to this time period because there's like three cataclysms, basically catastrophic events in society where like the barbarians destroy the Western Roman Empire. Then in the middle of antiquity, there's this cataclysm, like the sun goes dark for 18 months. There's plague, there's all kinds of things, like the complete collapse of society. And then around the eighth, ninth century, it happens again. But it was kind of all regional. Like so you had like the collapse of like the Western Empire, then it was the Eastern Empire, and then it was like Northern Europe. But it was during this time there's events where it's mentioned in the Middle East, it's mentioned in actually as far as like South America, China. And so what he concluded based on stratigraphy, which is like the study of like digging into the ground to find like it's kind of like if you dug where you're at in the UK, you'd be able to probably likely dig and find Roman ruins, and then you guys had built stuff upon them.
Hmm.
So what he concluded was that the reason they call certain things the Dark Ages is because there was no advancement in architecture, there was no advancement in culture, there was no advancement in language. So that's why they say it was a dark time. But what he concluded was he's saying like that if you have stratigraphy, you'd be able to find the early antiquity, mid antiquity, and late antiquity. They'd be built on top of each other. But he said no, they're actually built on the same level. So he's saying like the reason nothing advanced is because it was all the same Roman society, and this cataclysm that hit was it was the barbarians, it was this literally like I guess worldwide crisis or like a natural apocalypse, and it was plague, and it was all the above, and it happened at the same time. So Roman the Roman Empire ended through this event. And so, like, as Christians, we're believing this likely was Armageddon,
Hmm.
whatever the Bible describes in the book of Revelation. So, that being said, he basically said, so if you took out 700-ish years from the first millennium AD, I've started to theorize, like, so what if the Greco-Roman style that's everywhere, what if that was just Roman architecture? Like, what if that really was just Roman architecture, and
Yeah.
it was not a Renaissance style of like trying to go back and create Roman architecture? What if it really was Roman architecture?
Yeah.
And so like he showed so we did a breakdown on our YouTube channels where Gunnar Heinzen is showing like all these kind of illustrations. He's showing pictures. He's showing like the pottery, the glass work. He's showing the coins. He's showing the ships. He's showing the buildings, and he's showing how they're all the same, all these places. And so what's interesting to think like that, it makes more sense to me. Yes, like the people were not trying to copy the Romans from 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. It was their style. It was like that was the style they
Yeah.
did. And that's why it is repeated over and over again. And when you see it, like I saw a really good there was a really good YouTuber named John Levi, and he does a lot of work into kind of like lost civilizations and like kind of like or just kind of like yeah, we've been lied to about like histories and the timelines of these buildings. He was showing that there's a classic building in Rome called the Pantheon. It's got like the biggest unsupported concrete dome, obviously megalithic columns, just crazy structure. Well, in New York City, they had a building called Penn Station, or it was the old Penn Station. And he was showing the details of this building, and I was really kind of taken back of like the dome, inside the dome, and like kind of like the insets and like the different designs, and it was the same. And I just thought like, that is really weird because I know that a lot of people would point to like our capital, the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., and say that's pretty interesting that there's so many Greco-Roman style buildings. Well, we're told
Hmm.
they just did it like that because they wanted to project an image of Rome. But it almost does seem like that the only difference between the buildings where we're at and like ancient Rome is the fact that they are so those buildings are not as taken care of as much as ours.
Hmm.
And oh yeah, and I was going to meant to say was that so Gunnar Heinzen was showing all these kind of images, but he was also showing illustrations of like ancient Rome in the 1500s and the 1600s, where the city's covered in mud. It's covered in just debris, and like lots of people who have done the research we've done, we talk about the mud flood,
Hmm. Yeah.
and we're like, when was the mud flood? Because there's all these buildings that it seems very clear that there's been like a layer of sediment over the whole world where like the earlier civilizations have literally been buried, and in major cities, I'm sure like definitely in the UK, where you can see that there's basements. They're not quite basements. They're like it's like the first floors of buildings are under the ground now, and then you see lots of stairs up to the front door. But I
Mhm.
think what the front doors were used to be the second floor, and
Yes.
or at least the second floor. But there's I would say that or you can consistently see around the world where there's been buried buildings.
Hmm.
And so yeah, like so the really interesting part about this, and I'll, I'll let you respond, is that what he was concluding was that we're told the Vikings didn't know how to sail until like a certain period of time. But when you see the Viking sailing ships, sailing vessels, the sails they have and the ships they have are identical to the Roman ships of the first century. And so
Wow.
when you consider that, he's saying that the reason for that is because it was all the same time period. And from the story of like the history of America was we're told that Columbus sailed across the ocean blue in 1492. And we're taught that in history class, like he's the first one to discover America. But even when I went to school, there was always kind of a wink and a nod of saying, you know what, actually, a lot of people believe the Vikings got here first,
Hmm. Yeah.
maybe potentially 500 years before, like Leif Erikson. And so I started to really trip out when I thought when I was seeing this research, I was like, wait a minute. So if the Roman or if the Vikings ships, artwork, coinage, culture was the same as the Romans, what if their architecture was the same? And so if they got here 500 years before Columbus did, what if they started to build things? What would it look like?
Hmm.
Would it look
Yeah.
like the stuff that we see that has buried structures at the bottoms and it's all over America? And I thought that's probably the best answer I could possibly give you because I said I think it makes sense, and I think it makes sense that if the Vikings got here, they would have done something,
Hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like they would not have just found the place and then just forgot about it for 500 years until
Yeah, for
Columbus
sure.
discovered again.
Yeah. Man. Wow. Blown my mind, brother. I mean, I've heard that theory. I spoke to Paul about that theory as well. But that it is wild, man. It is wild. Do you think it's possible that we, as the world was a lot more connected than we think it was, going back hundreds of years? Do you think that's possible?
Well, I think there's well based on what that the concept of there was this cataclysm in like I guess you would say either depending how the way you want to view it, you could take 700 years away and say that was either way it was about 1,000 to 1,300 years ago. Like I'm not exactly sure when it was, but it was a world changing event.
Hmm.
Like the geography obviously could have been changed at that point. So yeah, like I would say that for one, I would say that if you could build buildings like they did in those times, I would think it'd be crazy if they could not sail across the sea.
Hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? If you could do that, if you could make a building look like that, you could make a boat that could sail across the ocean, I would assume, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so in the same way, I've always said like that if you could build a Great Pyramid, you could build a pretty good boat, I'm sure.
Hmm. Yeah.
So like that, I just think that we have been just taught a false history so much that it's almost like, well, how did they know about America? It's like, well, why didn't they know about America? You think that like that for one thing we know about people like the Romans, they were pretty ingenious about lots of things. So like if they wanted to do something, they could do it. I mean, even think about like the whole idea that we're told that they conquered the whole world because they invented the phalanx, like a certain way of fighting.
Hmm.
You have to know more than that to conquer the whole known world because like you would have to be able to keep people in line. So I think that there's lots of knowledge and lots of technology they probably had that we don't know about. But yeah, but at the same time, it's like that there's old maps that look different than the maps look today.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
don't think, and I'm not necessarily just willing to say they just got it wrong. What if the map did look different? I mean, obviously people do speculate, what if Pangea was true, but it's more recent and things changed? I mean, even like the story of Atlantis was like there was this major continent that sank under the sea in one day.
Hmm.
Like, so if that could happen, yeah, I mean, even today they talk about like climate change and things could change. It's like, so if we're told that, the coasts are going to be under the water in 20 years, they've been telling us that for 40 years, but
Even though they've been the same level for like
I
hundreds
was,
of years.
I think the funny part about that is when somebody says like that we're told in America about Plymouth Rock,
Hmm.
right? Well, Plymouth Rock's still on the beach, right? So
Yeah.
it's not under the water. So just just take that for what you will. But point being is like that if they say that these things could happen due to climate cycles in the world, then then yeah, I mean, obviously, some what could things have looked like 1,000 years ago?
Hmm.
And they could have looked different than this. So I would say I'm open to all kinds of things like that. But I at the same time I would say that the one thing I'm not really open to is the idea that the migration, the traditional story of the migration to America, like that people had to walk here. Like that's what they were told is like we had to have a land bridge between like Russia and North America. So people had to walk.
Hmm.
I think that they could sail.
Yeah.
I think there's all kinds of ways people could have got over here, but I think the last way I would ever said is they walked because you have all these islands, very remote islands around the world, and there's
Hmm.
people there.
Yeah.
So how did the people get there? They didn't
Yeah. Of
walk.
course. Yeah.
Obviously they sailed at somebody sailed,
Hmm.
or yeah, the place was way different
Yeah.
than it
Te
used to be. And that's
Technologies
very
that we just
possible
didn't know. Yeah.
for sure.
Why do you think there is such, it's a difficult question again, but why do you think there's such a pushback from the mainstream narrative? And you're called crazy for even doubting the history that we're taught. Why do you think there is such a strong pushback?
Well, a good example is like that movie again. We'll go back to that movie, The Matrix. Is saying like that there's all these people who are like literally, like the analogy they're using is that people have been made to be batteries for this
Hmm.
system. And it's like, so these people are asleep and all they are little batteries for the system. And so they live in an artificial reality. And these people are not ready to wake up from that. And they're literally going to fight everybody who tries to wake them up. Like they'll literally fight to the death to stop themselves from being woken up.
Hmm.
So it's interesting in that presentation that I was referencing that Gunnar Heinsohn. He's a traditional like researcher and like a professor. He's not even a Christian, so he's not trying to prove my worldview. So like people ask him like, so why were these people trying to deceive people? And so his his position was that there weren't these people. He's not trying to project like malice onto anybody's position of like why they're trying to deceive people, because he's saying like that the timeline's messed up and some researchers have accepted the timeline's true. So they've tried to do their best to fit the events we know in history into this timeline. And he's saying it
Hmm.
doesn't really work out like scientifically, but they've assumed the chronology is correct. And then so like maybe the events that have happened are not wrong, but the events in the order that they've done in is wrong.
Yeah.
And that actually, I actually think it makes sense because like it makes sense in like the way that when you get into like the stuff about outer space and the shape of the earth and things like that, and like even like the medical community and like the pandemic, it's like, so is everyone in on it? No, well, they are, even if they don't know it, because they've accepted what's true. They've accepted these theories as facts, and then they work in the parameters of those theories,
Hmm.
and then they establish facts based on the other facts they know. And so it's kind of like it is dogma. And it's like, so if you try to step outside that, question the theories that they tell you are facts,
Hmm.
yeah, then you get excommunicated from these systems. And then so, but overall, it's like obviously some people who run this place do know that it is a house of cards. Like they've propped up these lies, and it's like it's more or less that if I question this, then I'm going to question that, and then they can't have me questioning this other thing. And so if like I'm telling you they've been lying forever, well then that's dangerous to the whole system
Hmm.
because ultimately the our monetary system is all based on faith, believe it or not. I'm sure you probably know it's like the notes we give to people or the credit we give to people. It's like it's not based on anything tangible. So it's like
Hmm.
literally our faith in the system is the only thing that's supporting it. That's why if the news ever said tomorrow that everyone panic, everyone the grocery store is going to run out of food, there's going to be no toilet paper, then guess what? It would happen.
Yeah.
It would literally happen that next day if they said that. So that when you tell people that all these people are lying to you, then yeah, that I think that I think ultimately, yeah, they know that if enough of this happens, like I think that's the thing. It's like that as we went back to like what Elon Musk said about like that we are the median now. That like I can make a video now that gets millions of views,
Hmm.
and it's like that. Then on the other side of it, it's like you have these kind of just ancient little, I mean, like just almost defunct businesses where like the media's getting out there and they're putting all this money into these news shows, and people are now like one of my videos, like I could get more reach than a major news channel
Hmm.
one day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy that sounds like I could. So like you can imagine I'm just one person out of millions of people doing what I'm doing. So like if we're all saying the same thing, like yeah, this really does undermine the whole system.
Hmm.
And yeah, like if what I was saying was not correct, or if what I was saying was not or didn't have a potential truth to it, they could just prove me wrong.
Hmm.
But then
They can't, but they can't.
I don't think that they can because I think again like it literally is a house of cards and they just can't have it have to so it'd be better to smear people with like the tag of misinformation and like conspiracy theorists or whatever. But yeah, they can't combat uh questions with truth
Hmm.
because truth is not on their side.
Yeah. 100%, man. Brother, you've blown my mind tonight, man. Thank you so
Of
much. It has been
course, man.
awesome. I still feel like there's loads we can talk about. But
Oh, for sure.
why I've got you here, I know you're on Let's Get Freaky, so I've got to ask you this. Have you had any paranormal experiences? I've got to ask you before you go. Have you had any strange, freaky paranormal experiences?
Yeah, actually, I got a pretty good one.
Oh
At
man, let's go.
the time that I was waking up, and I've told this story before, but when I was first waking up to all the spiritual warfare and just the yeah, just all the things, like all the lies and everything. So, like I said, I was fully trusting in God, and I was really putting my faith in Him, and it is interesting how the Bible kind of even shows you like that people are kind of about to do something for God. It's like that's when the devil is going to try to reveal himself or to attack somebody.
Hmm.
And so I was kind of like I said, I was kind of maybe in a vulnerable place in my life, but I was waking up and I was watching this show late at night, and it was called "They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll," and it was really interesting because I was kind of like learning about demons. I was learning about all the kind of supernatural things, and this show was about like yeah these musicians like it's one thing to say like AC/DC. Oh, they're satanic. Okay. A lot of people would say, oh, shocker. The funny thing is a lot of people would say, oh, well, they're doing it for shock value. So they're not even really telling the truth about what they believe.
Hmm.
But when I was watching this show, I was seeing all these just famous rock band, famous lead singers, famous musicians over and over again saying they sold their souls. And then talking about the most satanic stuff and when he what they really did in this show and I'll give credit to the Good Fight Ministries, Joe Schimmel, they put this documentary on, but what they really did was they showed Aleister Crowley, the basically the father of modern Satanism, the New Age. He had this message of do what thou wilt, and he has like obviously he's written books about the book of the law and all this kind of stuff. But obviously they kind of revealed to me like before I even knew like who he was and why this guy was seriously bad news. And like he worked in like literal magic. And what a lot of people don't know about magic is literally the art of manipulating demons to do what you want. So like it goes back to like the lesser keys of Solomon. Solomon had the sigil ring and he was able to command demons to do what he wanted them to do. And I think that's why like the famous secret societies, they always show Solomon, they honor Solomon as somebody who they really respect. So Lester Crowley in the same kind of way was like, you see the sigils on his book and he tells you how to make sigils and command demons. And that's literally what witchcraft is. So, with that being said, these famous musicians, we're talking about him, they're giving reverence, Like obviously you have like the Sergeant Pepper's album.
Hmm.
He's on the cover of that. Then you have like Jimmy Page buys his house that was on Loch Ness
Yes.
and just weird things. And you're just like and I think what like Ozzy Osbourne singing about Mr. Crowley, like David Bowie has a song about Crowley. And it was kind of like there was a story about Elvis, and I just was like, okay, so again, like you have like the really openly satanic bands, but then you're seeing it's like, oh wait, it's all of them. And I think it was very interesting. It was almost like I was really realizing the depth of this. Oh my gosh, it's all of them. And then I understood immediately, like, okay, so I know it's Hollywood too then. So if it's Hollywood too, then it's kind of everywhere, right? That this is pervasive.
Hmm.
And so the interesting part about this, I was saying during that time in my life, I was going down the rabbit hole and I was like really researching lots of these things. But I'm watching this movie and I'm like falling asleep as I'm doing it. So I'm like, I know I know a little bit better now not to go down to dark rabbit holes like right before you go to bed. But I didn't know any better. So like I'm going to sleep and I'm kind of falling asleep. And I remember like the last thing I was remember was like looking at Aleister Crowley's ugly face. And I'm clicking off the TV and I'm falling asleep and all of a sudden I'm like one of these people who like to have a little bit of light in the room,
Hmm.
like like something just to be able to get to the bathroom if you need to, like keep like the light,
Yeah.
like the window open a little bit, just so you can see a little bit if you
Yeah.
needed to.
I'm the same man.
Yeah, just to have a little bit. And but when I was falling asleep, I kind of opened my eyes and I looked, and it was like my room was black as pitch. It was like you couldn't see anything. And I remember thinking like that seems a little bit weird. And all of a sudden I felt a cold in the room. And as I did that, I could kind of see like it's already black in the room, but I could see kind of black moving across the room. And I remember just being like, what is happening? And like I'm awake. And so like at one point I could even like hear like almost like a whisper. And I'm like at this point I'm like, oh man, I'm like I'm starting to freak out. And so like as a Christian, I'm like I know that like the demons have to submit in Jesus' name. So I'm like like rebuking whatever's in the room in Jesus' name. And as I do that, I have like this warm feeling go from like the the my toes and my feet all the way up slowly up my whole body to get to the top of my head. And I'm like, and it sounds like that sounds like a, if I end the story right there, people would say, "Oh, that's a good story." But it's like, but it kind of freaked me out more because it was like now I know it's real because I
Yeah.
see it, I hear it, I feel it in this room, and I'm like I'm still starting to kind of freak out about it. And the funny thing was, I was at some point early in the week, I was clearing out my closet, and I was given this tiny little cross at church one day, and I found it earlier in the week, and I felt like really compelled to like just go get that cross. I felt like I wanted to have it in my hand because like almost like the whole idea of like the vampire, like oh
Yeah.
like if I have that, then maybe I'll be more safe. So I went and found it, and then I'm trying to go back to sleep, and I can't really go to sleep, but I like a lot of people, I went eventually I can't go to sleep. I grabbed my phone, I started scrolling, and I had earlier that week I'd kind of cleared off a lot of the accounts on Instagram that I used to follow, and I followed a lot of Christian accounts, and I scrolled like one time, and it was like it was a Psalm 23 where it was like, "Though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I'll fear no evil." And I remember thinking, like, "Dang!" I was like, "All this stuff is happening." So like eventually I go to sleep, and like if that was the end of the story, fine, but it wasn't. So the next day. Um, my young daughter, who might have been, I think she was probably 6 at the time. She's talking to my now ex-wife, and we're going through the divorce at this time. And she's talking to my now ex-wife, and I hear her describing a nightmare to her, and I'm like, "Here, come here, sweetheart. Like what happened?" And she's explaining to me that she's going to sleep, and she couldn't remember if she was sleeping or not, but a fairy came into her room, and it was like a regular fairy, like probably a Disney fairy, but it morphed into something with claws and fangs and then like scratched her.
Oh man.
And so this is the same night. that this is happening. And I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. And I'm not one of these people who like, of all the things, if you guys ever hear the podcast I'm on, I'm not one of these people who have supernatural encounters all the time. And I'm the kind of person who would like raise an eyebrow, like, did that really happen? Like, so
Hmm.
like this, I can tell you without a shadow of doubt, this happened. And so like during that time, what was really crazy was that some neighbors of ours at one point bought my daughter something called a fairy door. And the fairy door is like this little toy that you kind of like stick onto the wall. And I'm thinking like, wow, like, so now like knowing what I know, that fairies through the mythologies were not considered like good.
Hmm.
Fairies are spirits. Obviously, there's stories like you even think even like the Peter Pan movies, like fairies. Tinkerbell comes in the room, and then Peter Pan comes into the room and it takes these kids out the window in their pajamas. So it's like the fairies were kind of like the medieval times alien abduction stories. Fairies
Hmm.
came in and took children,
Yeah.
and I'm like, wow, like that was actually one of these moments where it was like that is probably what got me to do what I'm doing now because I thought, wow, so there was demons in my house. There was nefarious spirits in my house. How did they get there? And even though I was waking up and I was starting to come to the right conclusions and I was putting my trust in Jesus, I'd already given these beings access to the house. I mean, maybe that door was an access. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but like, is that why they do that kind of thing? Is that the revelation method? Is that like
Hmm.
trying to garner consent from us? You
Yeah.
put a door to your wall so they could come into the room. Obviously, they
Hmm.
don't need that door, but that's the
So a symbol.
okay.
Yeah.
It's almost like that. I've always compared it to if you ever seen a vampire movie, they show you over and over again that the vampire is seen outside the room or outside the house and say, well, aren't you going to invite me in? I can't come in unless I'm invited. And
Hmm.
then once you invite them in, then they won't leave, right?
Hmm.
Because they had been invited. They needed you to invite them in. And yeah, it was really pretty crazy. I mean, I think that the positive part about that story though was so I told my brother, and my brother had been awake for some years now, and he experienced spiritual warfare just like that. And I told him, and he told one of his buddies, and his buddy was like, "Wow, the enemy must be worried because God's raising up a warrior." And like
Wow.
they were trying
Yeah.
to attack, and it was kind of like a really kind of like got chills moment because I was like, "Who me?" Like why would God ever use me? Like I'm like literally I'm at the point in my life where I'm like hanging by a thread. And like, but it was cool. It was like he kind of did plant that seed in me that like,
Hmm.
no, I started. It's like that. It's like at that exact moment I thought maybe I could do something. But before that I never even considered that I could do anything for God other than
Wow,
I
man.
was just hoping to just I just needed a lifeline. I needed anything,
Yeah.
and I thought that really is cool. Like how that God could use like that negative part in your life where it's like that
Yeah, man.
it did seem like that was kind of like the push I needed to say, okay, so now that I know that this could happen to me, well, how does it happen? And then if I can figure out how this kind of thing happens to people, maybe I could tell people how it happens.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like, yeah, so God used that. And I thought, pretty cool. Pretty cool.
That is cool, man. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, brother. That is amazing. And just look what you've achieved since then, man. I mean, millions of people watching your videos. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that it's very cool to look back and say that when I hear that now, like that, yeah. And it was interesting though, that being said, like weeks or days and weeks and months went by before I moved out of that house. I would come back into that house and I would feel like something was behind me. I would just have that feeling and like it was funny sometimes even till recently I would be telling people that story and I would almost get that feeling like don't tell this story.
Yeah.
Like you could have it was almost like somebody behind you saying do not tell people about us.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Wow.
pretty interesting. Like I said, because I don't normally, I said, I don't speak like that.
Hmm.
And I might have like Something similar happened after that, but it was like it's been sporadic. But a lot of people have asked me though that when I've researched dark topics, they ask if I've ever had spiritual attacks, and I have, but not to that level. Where I said
Mhm.
that's been the kind of one off, and it's really has been like that was a world changing moment for me.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, man. And obviously, even though, as you said, it was a negative experience, but it kind of put you on the path that you're on now, which is positive. So it's wild, man. That is wild. Thank you for sharing that, man.
Of course, man. Yeah,
Brother, wow, I've loved talking to you tonight. I'd love to get you back on as well because I know there's a lot more we can talk about. But I think we're
for
coming
sure.
up. I
Yeah,
think we're coming up to 2 hours. But just thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate you coming on. Come back soon. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you?
yeah, for sure. So if you guys want to hear the podcast, I got a couple of podcasts working right now. But if you go to my YouTube, it's just JT follows JC. Same thing on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I go by Joe Telford. That's my full name, and that's why I was trying to tell people my construction background because like I don't really want them to research my company too well. But yeah, if you go on to like um, Apple and Spotify, you'll find the podcast. But if you find me on anything, you'll be able to basically hit my link tree and I'll show you where I'm on Rumble as well. But yeah, and again, I mentioned that we did a movie with my buddy called Ancient Angels. And so like yeah, again, that's a play on the ancient aliens idea, except for it's a biblical, kind of worldview explaining all the megaliths and aliens and demons and giants and all that stuff. So yeah, man, I
Awesome, man.
appreciate it though, man. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. You're welcome back anytime. The links will be in the show description, so people need to go, subscribe, watch the film, listen to the podcast, because you are awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Let's
it,
do
man.
this again. Let's do this again. Guys, thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have, share it where you can. That's a great way to support us. And we'll be back very soon for more freaky conversations. In the meantime, stay safe and keep it freaky. Thank you very much, sir.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah, yeah, that was fun.